Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Cash That. This is your host, Joe Delera. I am here and we are coming to you immediately after Game 4 of the Western Conference Finals. And this episode is once again brought to you by our good friends at Props.Cash. Props.Cash is the number one player prop betting tool in the market. The software that they have for NBA, for WNBA, for MLB is some of the best that you can possibly get your fingertips on. And you can have it on both your phone and on your computer for 25% off your first month with code DELERA25. This includes pitching data, hit rate data for the NBA, spray charts, matchup things, home runs, hits, runs, RBIs, whatever you need. And you can get that for 25% off your first month with code DELERA25. The biggest thing here in Game 4 was, when we talked about this, I wrote about it in the game guide. I'm sure you guys are reading, obviously. The biggest thing to me was Anthony Edwards and Karl Anthony Towns were just terrible. Like, they were just not good so far through the series. Towns have been consistently in foul trouble. That kind of extended into Game 4. Anthony Edwards wound up picking up some fouls, being in foul trouble in Game 4 as well, but he was able to overcome it. The biggest thing was when you looked at these games and you watched, Game 3, when Dereck Lively went out, it changed things for Minnesota. And what I mean by that is it allowed Dallas, or it forced Dallas to play either Daniel Gafford more minutes, or you're seeing like a little bit more Dwight Powell. You're seeing a little bit deeper into the bench. Maxi Kleba obviously returned in Game 4, which was impactful, and that was important. But at the same time, there were definitely some issues in terms of like what we could expect from a ceiling, especially defensively for Dallas. Gafford doesn't have necessarily like the length and athleticism and the bounce that Lively has, and not having that, I think, was critically important for why I think not only Cat but Anthony Edwards felt much more confident driving into the paint, getting to their spots, getting into the teeth of the defense, and that kind of opened up things for the rest of the team. And we saw a little bit more Kyle Anderson today. Kyle Anderson had a great game, and there's actually one spot towards the end of the game where Ant drives into the paint. Kyle Anderson sets a screen for Cat. He tells Cat where to go. He's telling Ant where to pass the ball, pass cross court to the corner, and Cat hits a three, like a dagger, to send it to 95-90. It was a huge three. I don't want to call it a dagger, but it was a huge three right before he fouled out. At the end of the day, Cat really does need to kind of get the fouls in check. The whistle today was rough for Minnesota, and they still kind of overcame that and were able to win this game. Looking at this, I'm recording this like literally right after, so I'm trying to pull up the box score data. I want this to get out to you guys as fast as it can. Look, when we look at this game, Minnesota out-rebounded Dallas 40-38. They were tied in assists. They had 9 more steals. They had 9 steals to 6, tied in blocks. The turnovers were about the same. The biggest thing, though, was Dallas was really able to capitalize on those turnovers. They really got out and were able to convert the Minnesota mistakes into points, whereas Minnesota kind of struggled to be able to do that. They weren't able to capitalize in that same way, and that's kind of what kept Dallas in the game. Because when we look at the shooting percentages outside of the free throw line, which you always expect to be a little bit wonky for Minnesota based on the Gobert fouls, he's not necessarily a great free throw shooter. But then even Ant today missed a number of free throws, and they left a lot of points on the board. But Minnesota was able to dominate the paint. They had a 52.7% field goal percentage compared to Dallas's 42, and from 3-point range, they were 45. They had a 45.8% 3-point percentage compared to 35 for Dallas. And when we look at this, right, that was something that we had talked about. It's like Dereck Lively, we don't really know what his status is. I'm a little bit hesitant to think that he's going to play in Game 5, considering the fact that he was ruled out a day in advance of Game 4 with a neck injury. Neck injuries are serious. Dallas, I think, is in a position where they're saying, look, like, we're up 3-1. This game is on the road in Game 5. Like, I think they would love to close it out, get, Luka, Kyrie some rest if, before a potential finals trip. But at the same time, it does make things a little bit more complicated for them because, like, they do need health. They do need to get, their ducks in a row. And that makes it much more difficult. And when we watch this game and when we look at what happened and what we can take moving forward is, I think that they needed this win. Minnesota needed this win, obviously, like because they didn't want to go home, but also it kind of gave them a little bit of something. It's like, all right, like we kept watching these games. They were leading every game in the fourth quarter, and they blew the previous three games. There were a lot of late game heroics from Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving. Those things just didn't happen today. And instead, you saw Karl Anthony Towns make big shots. You saw Anthony Edwards make big shots. And, when I wrote the guy, we put it out on Twitter. One of the plays that I liked was Minnesota plus 2.5 games because I felt like you were getting plus 110 in game 4. And they were going to be a favorite if they could get to a game 5. So now we're seeing a minus 170. If you were to just parlay those, you're looking at about like plus 200. And we got plus 300 on the same bet. And that was just the way we were looking at it. Obviously, there's a little bit of risk in doing it earlier, but at the same time, we knew that there was going to be a little bit of value there. There's never been a comeback down 3-0 in the NBA playoffs, period. Never happened. 155-0. What makes this a circumstance that maybe we could see that? I think that, for one, Minnesota is an excellent team. Normally, like when you're looking at some of this data, you're looking at teams that are like not good. They're like not in the same class. Like think about this. This just in the other conference finals, in the Eastern Conference Finals, and we'll talk about Boston a little bit later, but Boston was in a completely different stratosphere than the Indiana Pacers. Like we all thought like maybe Indiana can get a game, maybe 2 games at most, but like this is going to be a wash, right? So when you're looking at that, it's like, yeah, like Indiana got dog walked and like obviously Halliburton was out. Maybe they could have won a couple games late. At the end of the day, they didn't. And it felt different than this series between Minnesota and Dallas, where Boston was winning these close games, but it felt like there were a lot of there was a talent gap for Indiana to Boston, but also some of the mistakes were there were coaching mistakes by Carlisle. There were mental mistakes by some of the players. And you could see that kind of coming to fruition, coming out in crunch time. And Boston didn't necessarily play great. You saw a lot of ISO ball. You saw a lot of step back jumpers with 10 seconds on the shot clock. But at the same time, they played much better than Indiana. And that's why, and there was a talent gap. So that's not a series where, you're going to see a team come back from down 3-0. Last year, we almost saw it. Boston was down 3-0 to the Miami Heat. Obviously, I think there was a talent gap in that series in the first place. Boston was more talented than Miami, but that doesn't mean that the more talented team doesn't always win. And we saw that. But Boston pulled 3 games. Game 7 starts, Tatum gets hurt instantly. And that really could have been the first time that a team came back from down 3-0, right? When I'm looking at this game, when I'm looking at this series, and part of why I think that this is possible even is the fact that Minnesota is a higher seed. So when you see the higher seed, you know that you're getting if you can force a game 7, you're getting game 7 at home, which to me matters immensely, right? Game 7 home court is one of the biggest advantages that you can have in the playoffs in this type of setting. And that is significant. That matters for this type of bet where you're kind of betting on everything. You're kind of saying all right, well, can we get this done? Can this happen? Can they make this work? Right. And when you look at this, now the price is down to Minnesota. Instead of 14-1 to win the series, it's down to plus 430. And in large part, that's because game 5 is at home. They're minus 170. They win game 5, this series starts to swing a little bit, right? And then even tonight, they were only a 1-point dog at home or on the road. So maybe, they win game 5, you force a game 6, maybe you're in a plus, it depends on Dereck Lively, I think. Maybe you're in a +2 scenario. You get that. All the momentum is swung in your favor. And then you have a home game 7 where you're going to be a favorite. You're going to be a -5, -6 because of the way you came back in the series. You adjusted. You were able to make the changes. And when I watched game 4, one of the biggest changes was it sounds insane, but it's literally just we're making the shots. It matters. It bends the defense differently. Like when Anthony Edwards he's able to get legitimate dribble penetration into the paint. Number one, because there's no Lively, but then because he's feeling a little bit more confident, they have to respect it. They have to collapse on him. And then you're finding guys on the perimeter. You're finding the Karl Anthony Towns. You're finding Jaden McDaniels. You're finding Nickeil Alexander-Walker. You're getting those guys on the perimeter to make threes and stretching the defense out. So it's bending the defense, and it's going to force Dallas to react. And when you look at what Dallas has from like a personnel perspective, you're not looking at necessarily the best rotation at this point, given the fact that they are down Dereck Lively. So like in this game, we saw Luka and Kyrie both play 40 minutes. PJ Washington, another 40-minute. Derrick Jones Jr., 34, Daniel Gafford, 31. Then you're seeing a blend of Josh Green, 17, Maxi Kleber, who's coming back from an extended absence due to injury, 13 minutes. Jaden Hardy, 12. Dante Exum put up 5 of the flukiest points ever in 4 minutes. And then Dwight Powell was immediately played off the court. Played 3 minutes. Still sucks. Still isn't an answer. So because of the Lively injury, I think it's stressing Dallas to a different degree. And I wonder, like I said, I wonder how fast they try to bring him back. Obviously, the pressure isn't necessarily there yet. But I think because there's a road game 7 for Dallas, right? Like game 7 is in Minnesota. If you lose game 5 in Minnesota, you go home to Dallas, you got to win in Dallas. They're all of a sudden like the pressure is significantly different. And I think that Dallas obviously can. I think that Dallas is an excellent team. You have 2 of the best closers in the NBA, period, in Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving. But at the same time, they didn't get it done today. And I think that some of this was even like they were fortunate because of all the fluky the turnovers, the second chance points, and the points off of turnovers that Dallas was able to generate. Whereas Minnesota was fortunate because they were 11 for 24 from 3, which is 45.8%. Dallas took 43s. Dallas still outscored them from 3-point range. They took significantly more. And Dallas took more shots overall. Obviously, Minnesota got a couple more free throws, so it's a little bit, like that. But Minnesota had all of their stars in foul trouble. Rudy Gobert was in foul trouble. Karl Anthony Towns was in foul trouble. Anthony Edwards was in foul trouble. And you saw them sit at certain points in the game, certain stretches of the game, and they were able to survive those. And that, I think, was critically important for this Minnesota team. Now, when we look at game 5, we see that Minnesota opens at -4. Let's see if it moves since the open. We saw Minnesota open at -4. And the biggest thing here when you're looking at this is you're saying, okay, so the line's actually moving for Minnesota. We're looking at there's a -4, there's a -4.5 in the market. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that Minnesota played well tonight, but at the same time, they were still making mistakes. Minnesota was still having a little bit of a difference here. And what happened as well was when we watched this game, we saw that Ant and Cat were better. They still have room to improve because of the fouls. And even though Dallas, I don't think necessarily played great, Minnesota should have won by more, and they didn't because of bad fouls, turnovers, etc. But I think that those are some things that you can clean up while also expecting that Dallas cleans up some of the things on their end. I think that Dallas, they're going to be able to shoot better. I don't think that it's necessarily tenable for Anthony Edwards to be defending Luka a ton and playing, like 40, 44, 45, 46 minutes, right? I think that that's a big ask. And I think that makes it much more difficult because Luka just has so many, his bag of tricks is just so deep that, you don't know what kind of foul trouble you're going to get into. And that makes things a little bit more difficult. So those are a couple of the things that I noticed looking at this game. And when you get Cat and Ant to play better, to shoot better, to feel more confident, because I think that was something that was starting to eat at both of them. You're going to see a little bit of a different Minnesota Timberwolves team. You're going to see a little bit of a different Minnesota Timberwolves effort. And the biggest thing was they really did take advantage of the fact that the paint was open, especially at the start of the game. And you can see that because they didn't have a guy like Dereck Lively on the interior, Dallas was having to show help. They were showing help. They weren't as crisp in their rotations, and then Ant was able to engage with that. Right, Ant was able to work with that, and he's able to put this Dallas defense into rotation. He's able to find the open teammate. He's able to make the right pass, and those are all things that are hard to expect from a 22-year-old, but he's learning fast. He's making the right moves. And I think he's trying to make the team better. He's trying to play winning basketball. He's not necessarily forcing anything, which I think is important, especially given the context, especially given the stakes. So when you, and this is the thing with the conference finals, like these series can swing so fast based on like the injury to Lively. And then if you have Ant and Cat and Gobert realistically playing at a different level because the shots are starting to fall, the pressure swings, and the circumstances change. So we had already known that both Dallas and Minnesota were due for shooting regression. Dallas was due for negative regression, while Minnesota was due for positive regression based on their shot quality, based on their effective field goal percentage, etc. Dallas is one of those teams because you have elite shot makers in Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving. They kind of like can balance that out. And it's something that we talk about with like Devin Booker and Kevin Durant, how, they take a lot of twos that aren't necessarily great for effective field goal percentage or expected effective field goal percentage, but they convert them at such a high rate that they become these great shots for those guys. And that's something that, both Kyrie and Luka can do. So there's a little bit less of a thought that there's going to be some regression, but then today they didn't shoot great. It just didn't happen. The shots didn't fall. And for Minnesota, if you're able to force things onto some of the other guys, like there were some actions where Luka Doncic was picked up significantly earlier, and Minnesota showed help. And there was one play in particular where you have like the screen gets set like pretty high for Luka. Cat shows help. Then he has to recover. The pass is sent to PJ Washington. PJ Washington's open. Like it's an open look and he misses it. Those shots aren't going to get easier on the road. But like those are shots that you need to fall if you're Dallas, because then that bends the defense back for Minnesota, where it's like, all right, like we didn't really want Luka to beat us. So we were trying to double him. But if the other guys are going to shoot at a crazy clip, then, we have to adjust. If they can't convert on those looks, then you're taking the ball out of Luka's hands. You're taking the ball out of Kyrie Irving's hands, and you're putting the ball into like Jaden Hardy, PJ Washington, Maxi Kleba, and those are players that you realistically want to have to beat you if you're Minnesota. So in game 4 or game 5 rather, I lean Minnesota. I'm glad that I have the other ticket. I don't know if I'd be super interested in laying like the 4.5 when we've seen all these games be super close. I think that honestly, I would probably I think I'd lean Dallas on the spread just based on what the number is. I'd look at an over. I know that this game kind of came under, and I think that a lot of the points were. Some of the points were easier to come by, but at the same time, Dallas just shot terribly, and they were really buoyed in effect by all of the, the points off of turnovers that they were able to generate. A couple things that I did notice and I did like from this game is, one of the plays that we were on was Luka Doncic to be over the 8.5 rebounds. We got that at -125. Then we grabbed even some 9.5 at plus money. I think that it's set at 9.5 again. I'm seeing right now for game 5. I still like that. I think Luka had 15 rebounds. And a lot of that, like I said, I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that they don't have Dereck Lively. And then you're running those lineups where it's Washington, Gafford, Jones, Kyrie, Luka. Like Luka is going to be looked at as the best rebounding option for Dallas, and you're not going to cut into his minutes too much. So obviously, so I think that the 9.5 is still playable. It's at FanDuel right now at -130. I haven't seen anybody else. I'm trying to look and see if they've posted some lines yet. I haven't seen anybody else post some lines, but that would definitely be. That's definitely. Oh, let's see. No, DraftKings doesn't have it up. That's definitely another look for me for Game 5 is to kind of go back to the well with that. On the flip side, I liked Anthony Edwards. I liked his points and rebounds, which also hit in Game 4. A big part of why I liked that was I liked that he had been so aggressive, and it's a win or go home game, so it's like you're gonna see him go for it. Like he's going to lay it all out there. He's going to put it all out on the floor. And rebounds to me are a lot of like times it's like a hustle stat. And you're trying to grab that. And you also want to grab the rebound because you're starting, you can get the offense into transition, which is a thing that Minnesota has been better at throughout the series. Dallas Minnesota in transition in this game was plus 4.1 points per 100 possessions. And when we look at what they've been able to do throughout the course of the series, that's been pretty consistent. When they're able to get out in transition, they're able to generate a lot of offense. Granted, in this game, a lot of it was off steals, but oftentimes it's off of live rebounds as well. So when Ant gets the board and he's able to generate the offense or kickstart the offense because he can put that motor down, not only does it stress out like a Luka and a Kyrie who are playing heavy minutes, who are then forced to run in transition. It throws Dallas's defense kind of into a little bit of a scramble. And when they don't have a guy like Lively who's as athletic, it can make it a little bit more difficult for them to keep up, or so to speak. So that's part of why I like the points and the rebounds there. I'll probably still like it. I might actually add the assists in Game 5, but at the same time, sometimes I don't like to do that when like he almost had a triple double again. You missed it by 1 assist. He had 9 assists, so he had 10 boards, 9 assists, and I think it was 29 points. The lines are going to be a little bit inflated after an effort like that. So I think that there might be a better way to attack it. Cat is set at 19.5 points again. He's not necessarily as good at home, but maybe, he found something here in the back half of Game 4 that, he's a kind of a streaky shooter. He's a confidence guy. If he's got confidence now, then maybe that kind of swings things a little bit, where, we can see a little bit better Cat. We can see a little bit better showing here out of Karl-Anthony Towns. So the 19.5 isn't a number that I'm like itching to go back to because we lost on him before, but at the same time, I understand why it's such an important, it would be so important for Minnesota. The other thing is like, like I was seeing in some of my mentions, like people are talking about Naz Reid, and they're saying like, you got to play Naz over Karl-Anthony Towns. But at the same time, it's not that simple. When you're down in the series and when you're Minnesota, you need to be as good as possible. You need to put forward your best. You need your best players to be the best, because you need that ceiling. And in order to win these games, that's what you need. You need the ceiling, and that's something that Karl-Anthony Towns provides. Naz Reid, excellent player. At the same time, Karl-Anthony Towns he's a supermax player for a reason. He's bad basketball IQ, incredible talent. And if he's cooking, that's something that Dallas doesn't necessarily have an answer for. And that's what's so important about Cat being involved in the offense, getting that shot back, and why they keep forcing him into these games. And they're like, look, we got to ride with him. We have to. It just is what it is. So in game 5, I like Minnesota. I think that Minnesota is able to stretch the series out. But I do think that the number is probably going to be bad. I think that, -4, I think is okay. I just think that the number isn't necessarily great. So I'd be looking at Dallas maybe at like a plus number here in terms of against the spread. Maybe we'll get a 5 because Dallas has just been able to keep it close. And I think that this is going to be another close game. Like every game has been so tightly contested. I don't necessarily see a reason why it shouldn't continue to stay tightly contested. So that's my thoughts on that, and my thoughts on Game 4, my thoughts on Game 5. As for Boston, congrats to Boston. I think that they did an excellent job throughout the postseason in terms of beating who they were presented with. We'll see how they're tested in Game 1. If this series ends in 5, I likely will be backing Dallas in a Game 1 spot. To me, Dallas would present some of the not only the best players that Boston will have faced, but also I think Dallas is much more battle tested throughout this playoffs than compared to Boston. I don't know necessarily if I would want to take Dallas straight up. I think that they're going to be like 6.5 point dogs in Game 1, just based on power ranking, based on model, etc. But at the same time, I do think that it's going to be like a little bit of a gut punch for Boston to play a team that's as good as Dallas. I know that some of the history, Boston blew Dallas's doors off one game. They shot like almost 50% from 3 this year. So I'm going to dive into the numbers a little bit more and see, like what makes sense, what maybe makes sense. But alternatively, if this series goes 7, if Minnesota is able to force a Game 7, I will be betting on Boston Game 1, and I'll probably do the Game 1 series parlay. I'd probably do Boston Game 1, Boston on the series. It's so much harder to go out, play a grueling 7-game series, especially if it's Minnesota. Minnesota will have played a 7-game series against Denver, then another 7-game series against Dallas. Not only the emotional toll, but the physical toll that takes on you is so significant. And then, you're going to have a Boston team who's not only well rested, but they're going to be getting a guy like Kristaps Porzingis back, who is so instrumental to their defense, to their team, to their scheme. If that's what we're looking at, I'd probably be going that way. And I would probably be looking at Boston Game 1, Boston on the series. If the series is wrapped up closer and faster by Dallas, I think I would be looking at Dallas in Game 1, just based on the fact that I think that they're going to be the toughest team that Boston's really had to face so far during the playoffs. I think that's going to be a little bit of an adjustment, whereas you've seen Dallas kind of deal with some of these elite teams, elite defenses, and I know like some of the things have broken well for them, or the matchups were good, but Boston has really struggled against pick and roll ball handlers throughout the season, throughout the postseason, and that's going to be difficult for them when you have two guys like Luka Doncic, Kyrie Irving. And when you look at what Dallas is able to do, I think one of the things that makes Dallas so hard to defend is that like you can scheme all you want against them. And I think that matters, obviously. But some of the improvisational skills of Luka and Kyrie are so significant and so strong that they can stress the defense in a way that you can't necessarily plan or prepare for. And I think that is super, super important. So looking ahead, you have to like Boston. Boston is the best team in the league. They've put up the numbers show that they've been the best team in the league. They've been the best team in the NBA. But at the same time, I do think that maybe it's not like Dallas or Minnesota is going to be dead in the water. I think that both teams are good. Both teams present different challenges. And I think that that's going to be something that Boston has to look out for. So from a scheduling perspective, the final start on June 6th. We will be back to you next Tuesday with another episode of Cash That. I'll break down my finals best bets. Look out for a finals player props forecast. All of those things will be out there, and it's going to be really exciting. It's going to be a lot of fun. I think it's going to be a great matchup. I'm just happy that we didn't have 2 sweeps, so we have a little bit more games. We have a little bit more basketball in the week ahead. My one recommendation for you guys is going to be, what do I want to recommend? So many options here. You know what? Get a little bit of arugula for a sandwich. So I got like some Italian meats. I was making my own Italian sandwiches. So I got the pepper ham. I got pepperoni. I got a little bit of prosciutto, and I got a little bit of gabagool. So I got that stuff, right? And I got arugula. I threw the arugula on. Did it like, I think if you're like taking a sandwich to work, sometimes like the olive oil and vinegar, like it doesn't really work as good because like the bread gets soggy. I got some spicy mayo. I like the spicy mayo on it. I think that's good. But arugula's got like that little bit of freshness, a little bit of crunch, and that little bit of bitterness that kind of evens some of the things out. So I'm going to recommend arugula. Throw arugula on a sandwich instead of a little bit of lettuce. I think it's a little bit better of a bite. It's not as slippery. Like if you get like the romaine in there, or the leaf lettuce, it's like the fucking buns going everywhere. It's disaster. So I like arugula better. I think that's a better option. So once again, this episode is brought to you by our good friends at props.cash. You can get props.cash for 25% off your first month with code Delera25. Use it for the rest of the finals. Use it for the WNBA season. Use it for the MLB season. It is going to make you a better, especially as you transition into a sport that you probably aren't necessarily used to. You want to have the best tools and you want to have the best in the business with props.cash. You can have that with 25% off with code Delera25. So stay tuned, keep up with the best bets. Let's see how many games the Minnesota can kind of force out of this, and we will be locked in and back for the finals so we can continue to cash that.